All right, well, thank you for those of you that have joined us for the forum. We're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Gina Hugo. I'm Parks Coordinator for Sherburne County and on the board of Greater Minnesota Regional Parks and Trails representing District 4. And our forum today is on RFPs, and it's a real beginner course in RFPs, and it's put on by several of our business members and representing the firms of WSB, SRF, HKGI, and Damon Farber. I will allow all of our business members to provide their own introduction, and then we'll get started with the presentation. So I just want to give a couple of housekeeping reminders that questions can be posted in the chat. And I'd also, I'll keep my eyes open for anybody raising their hand so I can call on you, but we'll go for about 40-45 minutes with a presentation, and then we'll open it up for questions and discussion. But if at any point you want to type a question in the chat, that's perfectly great. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Ken Grieshaber, who will introduce himself, and then I'll call on the next one. So go ahead, Ken.
Sounds great. Thanks, Gina. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ken Grieshaber with SRF Consulting Group. I am a landscape architect, and most of my focus at SRF is really on park design, park planning, park master planning. And this is a great topic. I think we have what's going to be great, I think, about this session. We have three other consultants here to kind of share some of their knowledge and insight on writing proposals. And I spend quite a bit of my time as I've developed through my career writing proposals. So I've seen my share of great proposals, some that could have been better, but I think we're all here to kind of discuss and have dialogue about how we can all find better ways to write proposals, but then also respond to those. So I guess I'll pass that baton over to Bob.
Oh, thanks, Ken. Yeah, my name is Bob Slipka, also a landscape architect at WSB. Been in the park and trail profession, I guess you could say, for about 23, 24 years. So very familiar, like Ken said, with seeing process from master planning to construction implementation. And then see my fair share as well with reading and responding to proposals and RFQs that are submitted. So equally interested in helping Gina kind of do this presentation so we can hopefully provide some valuable insight and resources for future RFPs and RFQs that you guys are going to be reading. We'll pass it on to Andrew.
Thanks, Bob. My name is Andrew Montgomery with Damon Farber Landscape Architects. I'm a registered landscape architect. I graduated from the University of Minnesota with my master's in landscape architecture and have been practicing for about 9 years. My emphasis has been on park design and construction. I think Damon Farber might have a little bit more of a reputation weighted towards the construction side, but we also have a lot of experience doing park and trail planning as well. So yeah, real excited to be here and to share some of our insights, writing a lot of proposals, what kind of works and what could use some improvement.
And Gabrielle is next.
Gabrielle Grundy, I'm a landscape architect at HKGI. I've been with the firm for a little over 12 years, and my work is mainly focused on parks and trails, master planning and system planning as well. And interested to learn more about, refreshing information about responding to RFPs and RFQs, and also present some of the information as well. So thank you.
Great. Thanks everybody for the introductions. I will pass it off to Ken. So you can go ahead and start sharing your screen. And then just a reminder, if you have just hopped on, you can go ahead and post questions at any time in the chat, and then we'll have room at the end for questions and dialogue as well.
Okay, so we'd like to cover basically two main parts through our presentation here. The first one, I'll talk about some of the type of solicitations that clients are often faced with how to send out a request to any consultant. And then we'll talk a little bit about the process overview and more the timing related to distributing RFPs, talk about some of the important content to include in proposals, and the evaluation process, because I think all consultants want to know how their proposals are being evaluated so they can get feedback if they're ultimately not selected for a project, so they can improve on their next submittal. And then we'll talk a little bit about interviewing and negotiating contracts. And we're going to keep this a little free flowing, but we do have a Q&A at the end of our presentation. So if there are questions or from our audience here, we can certainly try to have some dialogue about those, or Gina will potentially look at posing some questions to the consultants. So in terms of types of solicitations, there's really five primary ones that we see a lot of from clients. And sometimes just knowing what the scope of work is from your municipality or whoever you may be is important to know how you should present something to a consultant to respond to. So the ones we all love as consultants are oftentimes letter proposals where they don't entail tons of effort. So typically for letter proposals, if it's a more straightforward scope of work, we can typically prepare those in a much simpler format for people to respond to. And oftentimes those are cost competitive submittals that we all need to try to win work. The next type is request for qualifications, and oftentimes requests for qualifications, those type of proposals are issued when maybe there's a more specialized type of work you might be soliciting from a consultant, or you're really looking for those specialized expertise. It might be a larger scale project, but oftentimes fee is not really the big evaluation criteria for qualifications, and there are definitely the right kind of projects to use RFQs. And we're seeing actually more clients wanting to use that format instead of doing competitive cost proposals. And by far the most popular one, I would say, are requests for proposals where, most consultants have to spend, 40, 60 hours of time putting together these proposals where you have to demonstrate your project experience, and then fees, the scope of work and fees and so on. And those are the typical ones we see from most of our solicitations. The other forms that some of you may be familiar with, consultant pools, there are some agencies around the Twin Cities that go to this format where they're 1 to 3-year contracts, and basically those allow for consultants to be hired in a more streamlined process. So they're typically 1 to 3 years in length, and as projects come up, they can just be divvied out consultants. And I think most of the consultants in the presentation today would say, yeah, that's a great format for trying to do work in some agencies. And then once in a blue moon, there are some work proposals that a client might be soliciting that it's a little unknown exactly about what they're looking for from a consultant. And oftentimes they'll start with letter of interest just to see who may be interested in taking on maybe a more unique project. The last one, best value, which I won't go into tons of detail, there are some agencies around town that have gone about doing this best value process. City of Roseville, City of Rochester, City of Brooklyn Park have all used that in some of their consultant selections. And basically what this gets down to is really trying to categorize and weigh, 5 or 6 categories of evaluating a proposal. And the only thing I could probably say about this slide is when you are trying to evaluate proposals, it's always a good idea to have either a weight system, a point system, something that you can all take back to consultants that are looking for feedback after they have submitted a proposal and say, these are the categories, or this is how we got to our decision. Our whole world right now is about metrics and points and so on. I think it's a great way and a fair way for both the client and the consultant to know why they were selected or why they were not selected. And the one thing I do see at the bottom, I think most of us here in the room would say, preparing concise, succinct proposals is always a great thing. Nobody wants to read a 50, 60-page proposal. So I think placing page limits on your proposals is always a good thing to do. So we've interjected a few tips into our presentation, and this is the first one that comes up. And the gist of this slide is feel free to use consultants, I think, as a resource. We're not all billing by the minute or the hour. If you have a question about how much something costs, like if you have a proposal you're not sure if you want to assign a dollar value to it, ask the consultant. Or if it's a specialized type of project, we're all here to help you and help you understand your project, whether it's costs or to the scope of work, whatever it may be. And we can be a great resource to help you prepare proposals before they're even submitted. So all of us here in the room have established relationships with clients, and really think about that relationship when you're working with a consultant and developing that relationship, because the more you work with any consultant, the better that relationship becomes and the better you work together. So I think that is the gist of what I had to say. I'm going to pass it on to Bob here to talk a little about the solicitation process.
Oh, thanks, Ken. So yeah, it's kind of said a lot of the same points are kind of driven home, you know, and I would agree with kind of what he said. Having involvement from consultants are very helpful, especially on kind of the top piece. I mean, obviously the identification of the project is the first part. You know, like Ken said, is it an RFQ? Is it an RFP? I mean, what's the complexity and scale of the project? And once that's done, you're really going to start developing that written solicitation. And in order to do that, you want to kind of think through timing, no different than constructing a project. It's always nice to have a little time in there. I know there's kind of state requirements where it's like, oh, we have to have 10 days. We're going to put it out there and we're going to like ask for response in 10 days. The more complex the project is, the more sub-consultants we have to bring into our team. And sometimes it's nice to have the added time. So maybe it is a 2 or 3 week period to really get a thorough RFP developed, you know, for you guys to review. And that kind of probably goes back to, again, what Ken had mentioned. We've all been kind of in the realm of reviewing and reading these and responding to these RFPs. So reach out to any of us at any time. I mean, we love to help you guys out or review them or provide insight. There's a number of clients that I have where they'll send them to me to review them prior to, just kind of in a technical sense. So I'll read through it and kind of provide my reaction. Obviously, all of us read and interpret things differently. Even the 3 or 4 of us on this presentation, each one of us will read it and interpret an RFP very differently. So it's nice to get those perspectives before it goes out to the public, and it avoids a lot of addendum writing and answering of questions. So, you know, certainly use that, you know, to help things out. From the writing of that, obviously, the solicitation is then distributed out, and, you know, allowing time to potentially have a site visit, you know, if that's something that needs to be done, the timing of that and the timing of responding to questions is all very important. And that solicitation meeting is valuable on some projects. If it is a little bit more of a complicated project, having a site meeting, talking about what you think are the challenges of the project, you know, whether it's an adjacent property owners, or maybe it's some permitting that's going to have to be done, maybe it's a contaminated site, or, you know, there's historical pieces of the project that require special coordination or permitting. Things like that are nice to have on that site visit. And then equally so, it's nice to understand what you're thinking for your visions and goals. A lot of times we read these things and we're not, you know, we don't have that preface or that background of how the project came to be. I mean, it could have been years and years of a client working with landowners and trying to acquire property and going through a long process. And you have a lot of investment in that project, and we're coming in kind of midstream. So, you know, sometimes that site meeting is helpful to not just see the site, but also understand kind of your connection to the process and where you kind of see things going. The next kind of item there is obviously kind of the solicitation, kind of the Q&A responses. Again, I've seen kind of both ends where some clients will call them and I'll ask questions and they'll respond directly on the phone with answers. And I'll be like, oh, is this going to be posted as an addendum or something? And they're like, well, if someone else asks the question, we'll share the information with you. Well, again, we're trying to give you guys an apples to apples comparison to look at things. So it's always nice that you have a formal Q&A process that will walk through, you know, what are the details and sharing the information, because I might not think of a question that Ken had or Andrew or someone else had. And, you know, it's nice to see that, like, oh, that's a good point. I didn't think about that, but that brings up a good point. And then equally, if you do give me a response like, well, you know, perhaps there's construction services as part of the scope, but it's not super clear. And you're going to tell me that you want me to come to every other weekly meeting or something of that nature, but another client doesn't hear that information and they assume, well, you know, the client's going to lead CA, we're just going to kind of support them by reviewing shop drawings. I mean, every one of us wants to win every project that's out there. I mean, none of us are going to lie and say no, but equally so, we realize that, you know, the work is equally spread amongst all of us. So just trying to even the playing field is nice. I know one thing that we were talking about just prior to this starting is fees. I know a lot of times clients try to hold the fee so they don't divulge a number or a budget number, thinking that they just want us to be as competitive in a fee base as we can. But if it is more of a planning project, I find that's where the bigger challenges come into play. Planning projects, you know, or master planning projects tend to have more involvement with the public or public engagement opportunities, whether it's in person or online or pop-up booths or things like that. So even knowing if you have a range like, hey, we're looking at a range of $40,000 to $70,000. You know, that helps us at least understand how do we build that public engagement platform for a project like that. If we kind of know your budgetary realm, you know, we can kind of cater and build that structure for that in there. Or maybe we have fee alternates that are bid into that. So if you want to do extra meetings, you can do that as well. And there's just a number associated with that. And then, you know, obviously you're kind of evaluating those, and like Ken said, having a point system or somehow how you're kind of ranking those proposals is really nice. Kind of again gets everyone in the same place, and that helps you decide which consultants you really want to interview. And then really from the interviewing process, you'll kind of go through that final selection. A lot of times we'll see clients developing like an interviewing group, and that might be a mixture of people. It's not just a specific maybe parks group or a planning group. You know, maybe you're going to bring in one of your engineers or maybe even your clerk, you know, something like that, just to bring a different perspective or lens to really kind of feel like, well, how would you feel? What was kind of the personable connection that you have? How do you feel they convey their technical experiences? So having things like that are very nice. And then again, it was brought up earlier, a wrap up. I know some clients I've talked to are a little bit more shy about having a pre-proposal meeting because they feel like we're going to come back and try to talk them into hiring us instead of who they've actually chosen. That really isn't the case. Like Ken said, it really is to help us understand, you know, where did we lack it. It may be that we aren't skill set enough to do the project, but maybe we just didn't develop enough scope or narrative to sell that piece of the project in our proposal. And so taking those pieces away from our scoring really helps us know on future projects, how do we best, you know, rework our wording or represent our qualifications to sell ourselves better. And then this really is just the opposite of the last slide. You know, poorly written presentation or proposals obviously can create a lot of complexity, at least, you know, for the consultants as well as the client. You know, it leaves more open-endedness, and at the end of the day, what we tend to find is certain people will come in and develop a very straightforward fee because you have a very straightforward proposal, and then what happens after that is you barely got your contract signed, and then you have, you know, clients that are coming back and wanting to do amendments because we didn't know that was included and we didn't know that was included, and the next thing you know that the fee is double because a lot of scope is missing. So being more prepared in the front end and really getting those conversations had and that communication out there is really key to really being successful and making sure the project as a whole is successful. From here, it goes over to Andrew to talk really about the content.
Excellent. Thanks, Bob. So I'll be reviewing the typical content you'll find in a proposal response and what sections we're used to seeing in an RFP. So starting things off, the cover letter. The cover letter functions as an overview or an abstract for the proposal. It is typically addressed to the project manager. It might include kind of personal touches, references to previous successful projects or building upon previous work. And then it also identifies the best team has been established for the project. And we feel that this is one of the most important parts of a project, is getting the right team that addresses the goals and challenges of a project, that you have the right expertise, the right fit. Is there a specialized sub-consultant needed for historical assessment, public art, or some kind of specialized community engagement? And then it also expresses the consultant's interest in working on the project. Next slide. Next typically comes project understanding. At a high level, it identifies the key issues and goals for the project. As you're evaluating proposals, I would look for a deeper understanding than what is typically seen during a site visit or just seen at the surface. So has the consultant reviewed existing planning documents or background documents? Have they done some type of historic analysis? Do they understand that specific project type? Are there key stakeholders that need to be addressed? There's this difference between engagement and outreach. Are there groups that you have to go to their front door and do targeted outreach, that you need to, go out to them and ask for their opinions or what their key issues are? And then in the bottom right-hand corner, you can see a little image there. Sometimes if it's a big enough project, we'll develop an issues and challenges or analysis graphic. So here you can see, I'm not sure if that's the Mississippi River, but basically representing those issues graphically can be really helpful to see where those land spatially on a site. And this could be an opportunity for the consultant to identify issues that might not be listed in the RFP. Is there something that we're seeing that the client isn't? Next slide. So the approach and work plan, sometimes this gets separated out into 2 separate chapters of the proposal or categories. So I'm getting lost a little bit. It basically, this can break the project down into specific phases or tasks that are required to complete the project. The work plan has the basis for the entire project, and it becomes a binding contract for what deliverables will be included and what aren't included. And I think that's a fine point there. Bob touched on this. It's like what's included in the scope of work and what isn't included. So is there structural review, or is there CA that is not included in our fee proposal? Next slide. So the schedule ties that previous work plan into a timeline, and it shows project phases, deliverables, meetings, and milestones. So again, this should show where all these specific meetings are. Is there a PMT or a project management team that's meeting bi-monthly to review progress on the project? Is there a technical review team that's reviewing, drawings at a very technical standpoint? And this might show detailed information on community engagement. When are the open houses occurring? When is their targeted outreach occurring? When are online surveys being opened up? So a lot of detail can get packed into these schedules. Next slide. Qualifications and experience. So again, this one kind of gets broken down into 2 sections. You have project team resumes. So that's staff that will be working on the project. And then you have relevant project experience. So that's demonstrating that you have experience working on similar projects. This provides an opportunity for the consultant to credential themselves. It also identifies who's a prime consultant, who's the sub-consultant. So the prime consultant, all the communication channels are going through them. They're managing all the sub-consultants. And there's a fair amount of time that goes into that management if it's a big enough project. We've had projects with up to 10 sub-consultants, whether it's stormwater engineer, civil structural engineer. We've even had like sound specialists that go out onto the site and measure sound. And we use that to design, screening or methods to reduce road noise, that sort of thing. And one important point is I would look at the project experience or the relevant project experience, and then the staff experience, and make sure that those 2 are matching up. You're getting staff that are also working on the projects that they're highlighting. Next slide. Let your consultants demonstrate what they can do for you. So if there's a specific skill that you're looking to highlight on your project, say it's you have community engagement and you really want these gorgeous renderings done, or if you want a 3D fly-through animation, which is something that we've been doing more of, ask them to kind of highlight that skill in their proposal. I wouldn't do this for small projects, but for larger projects that are really a hallmark project for your agency or your area, then I think it makes sense to have your consultant or request the consultants to develop something like this in the proposal. Next slide. And tip number 3, so ask your peers who they're working with. Try to find a peer that's working on a similar project scale and program as your project. Is it a construction or a planning project? Is it a park project? Is it roadway transportation? Is it facilities? Are they using a lead landscape architect, or is an architect leading the project, or is an engineering firm leading the project? I think those are all nuances that are good to nail down ahead of time. And then I think this was an earlier tip, but I'll just throw another plug in there to promote your project before releasing the RFP. It can't hurt anything to talk to consultants before your project is released. I think there can be a lot of value gained in talking to someone that's done a similar project. Are there unknowns that you might not have caught that you could add into your RFP before it gets released? So the more you know what others are doing, and the more the consultants know what you're doing, the better your project can become. Next slide, and now I'll hand it off to Gabrielle to review proposal evaluation.
All right, thanks, Andrew. So as you receive your proposals and you're evaluating them, it's important to have a scoring methodology that Ken mentioned earlier in order to identify the key aspects of the proposals that are most important, and it makes it easier to compare proposals to each other. And again, going back to writing the RFP, it's helpful to be very specific about what sections are required or desired in the proposal, and also what order they're in. That can help you more easily compare the proposals apples to apples, so that one proposal isn't unfairly much larger or another one's much smaller, then it's harder to compare. And we take a lot of time to write our proposals, and we think that our potential clients read every word, but that's probably not true. So it's important to be very specific about what kind of information and content you want in your proposal, so it's easier to compare them. And then again, going back to the content and the sections, does the cover letter clearly identify who your main contact will be and how you'll be interacting and communicating with them? Does the proposal identify something unique or interesting in terms of experience, or the people that will be working on the project that stands out compared to other proposals? And if the RFP is written very clearly and there's very specific tasks listed in it, then the cost is a very good determining factor. However, it is helpful to have that option for additional services, like Bob mentioned earlier, because then you can compare like how much extra meetings will cost if there's a wide variety in the type of engagement or other tasks that are desired, but there's not specificity in the RFP, then having that price and cost listed by task is helpful when comparing. Okay, next slide. When you're looking at the proposal organization and layout, again, this can be evident of what your products might look like. So if it's poorly written or there are spelling mistakes, maybe that is indicative of what that consultant will prepare in terms of products. So that's something just to take a look at if you're reading it very carefully. And then also looking at the graphics and how things are laid out could also be an example of what the types of documents and products might look like. And when I'm working on a project, I continuously go back to the proposal that I wrote to look at what did I say I would do and how did I say I would do it. And so I do use it quite a bit. So it's important to understand what's in that proposal and use that as a tool to evaluate what you'll be getting for your product. Okay, next slide. So then again, when you're looking at fees, it is important to ask for a specific format that will help you evaluate and compare. So task hours by the individual people working on the project is much easier, especially for planning projects, to compare which consultant gives you the best value. More for construction projects, you'd be looking at a lump sum percentage of construction. And then again, offering that opportunity to put additional and optional services into a proposal is helpful when you're not exactly sure how many meetings you want or how many engagement events. Okay, next slide. So tip number 4, if you don't know what a project should cost, it's important to list the key desired deliverables along with additional services that you may want if there's budget available, and also maybe list what your staff can do if you're open to doing some of the work yourself, and that will help the consultants write a proposal that's more tailored to how it's best to work with that agency or client. Okay, next slide. So some of the challenges that we face when we're responding to RFPs are some of the constraints on like the page limits and format, although it is helpful. Like Ken said earlier, if you have a requirement for a 10-page proposal, that helps us. We don't have to do more than 10 pages. We know that's what we got to stick to. However, some specific formatting things like tabs, big headache. Sending 10 printed proposals all bound with tabs, that can be a lot of extra work. Having an emailed RFP these days is very helpful, much easier to respond to. Also thinking about the deadlines listed in the RFP. If you do have very specific deadlines, it's important to list those, but also thinking about how long it will take to actually get the work done, and making time for work in between meetings is important to consider. Is that the next one? So when interviewing, it's important to think about who you actually will hire. So if you receive several proposals, it's best not to interview everyone that submitted a proposal. It's best to be very picky about who you want to interview, maybe only 2, maybe only 1 if you really think you know which one you're going to hire, because it is a lot of work for us to prepare for an interview. It's also helpful to be transparent, to provide the questions up front, or at least some type of format or structure, so that we know who we should bring to the interview and what the best way to be prepared for the interview is. All right, I think that was my last one, so I'll hand it back over to Bob now.
Yeah, thank you for that. This is, I think the last slide was just negotiating contracts. And the key thing here is just, the phrase negotiating. I know a lot of times on projects and interviews, there's a point system that's utilized, and that kind of helps decide, what is that ultimate kind of scoring system that's out there. But at the end of the day, I think all of us here can say that negotiation obviously is something that's legal and it's available. So if it comes down to you interview, like Gabrielle said, if you interview maybe 3 or 4 consultants and you've narrowed it down to like your top 2, and you really prefer the one, but maybe their fee is $2,500 more than the low fee, but you really feel they seem like they're the best fit for the project. Their personalities fit with your personalities really well, and that's what it is. There's nothing out of realm of coming back and trying to negotiate a fee that best suits that, and that kind of comes back into building time into your process. You certainly don't want to take it down to the point where you're going to receive the RFP, you're going to interview in 4 days. You're going to go to the council or the board within 2 days after that. I mean, in some cases, it does take time to reassess the proposals, reassess the interviews, and then make that final decision and negotiation before it goes to a board. So timing is a big one. And then, reach out to consultants. I mean, I know we've kind of driven this home a few times before, but, we love to be helpful and we provide a resource. So should you select a consultant, I mean, ask them that you're obviously wanting to award them the project, but before that, is there anything else that maybe they're thinking of in the back of their mind that maybe wasn't brought up. Like Andrew said, maybe there is some historical investigation work that has to be done that wasn't even talked about, but maybe there's risk of that, or maybe there's risk of contamination on a site, whatever it's adjacent property or something. A lot of times we spend time doing that investigation and assessment of the site and what's happening around there, just to get a feel of the context of the project, and that's just part of our process. But a lot of that is just things that we kind of take in. But if you're not maybe asking for historical evaluation of a site, we obviously don't want to include a $5,000 or $10,000 fee to do that, because we're going to price ourselves out of our other competition that are all proposing on the same apples to apples scope. So ask consultants, don't be afraid to ask about the scoping fee. Make sure everyone's really on the same page. And again, be fair with negotiations. And we understand there are projects out there that are very simple. They're very straightforward. They don't have a lot of complexity to them. So a lot of times those are fairly negotiable in terms of what our fee really is going to be. But if it is a more complex project and there is a lot of kind of vagueness or unknowns to things, some of that maybe is negotiated on an hourly basis, like maybe the contract is awarded as it is, but you build in some additional retainers or some kind of pieces within that contract. So maybe you don't have to do amendments later or go back to your council or board. You can just have that pre-negotiated in there for special services to kind of streamline your contractual process. And then the other one is just, allowing time again for that negotiation piece. All of us read and interpret things differently. I'm sure if Gina, for instance, was writing an RFP and she gave it to two of her peers, I'm sure there'd be just different interpretation even in that one. So it is just nice to kind of make sure that, everything is clear and concise and everyone generally understands kind of what is happening. And lastly is just, ensuring that the insurance requirements are all met. That's kind of the language of the contract. Obviously, we want to make sure everyone is insured and required, but more clients I'm seeing are providing their actual contract within the RFP. So to help streamline the process, they actually say, hey, review our contract. And in your proposal, if there's things that you want to change or there's language you want our attorney to review, that's something that's kind of put in there and it kind of jumps over that hurdle right out of the gate. So when proposals are provided, that initial review is done for the legal contractual language. And your attorney has a little time to review whether there's things that they want to amend or accept as part of that contractual requirement, above and beyond just the insurance requirements. And then from that, the last slide is really just kind of diving back to kind of a Q&A process. I know there's a number of people on the call, and we certainly would like to hear, even if they're not questions, but hear successes or challenges, or are there reoccurring issues that you kind of see a lot of times in your proposals and you've always been afraid to maybe ask a consultant. We're obviously here to help kind of clear that up if we can. So with that, I will turn it back to Gina.
Thanks, Bob, and thanks everybody for the presentation and your time today. That was excellent. I would invite everybody to kind of turn on their camera and take the opportunity to raise your hand and offer up questions. And we can go ahead and stop sharing the screen, and then we'll have more of a dialogue. So does anybody have any questions right out of the gate? I have probably a really easy one. My question is, what is the most common question you have when reading an RFP? For instance, what's the most often omitted piece of information that's really important for you to know when putting together a proposal?
Budget.
Gabrielle? Budget?
The budget, yeah. If it's not stated, I mean, some agencies very clearly put it at the very front of their RFPs, which is really nice. But a lot of them don't. And so that's usually our first question when we read an RFP, if it's not listed.
So I've had the challenge of not knowing how much something is supposed to cost. So that, I suppose that's an instance where we reach out to you.
Yeah, yeah, it's good to reach out to other agencies, cities, counties, as well as consultants, and we can tell you, well, we've done this project for 4 other clients, and this is what it costs for each of those projects. And you can look at the product that was developed and the process and determine which matches what you're looking for. we've done that lots of times.
Yeah, I think even including just a range of fees is helpful to any consultant, so you can kind of see where things might be on a minimal versus a more extensive effort. I think that's just all helpful for the consultants to know.
Yeah, and I guess to turn it back to you, maybe Gina, from our perspective, we know some projects are obviously pre-planned and some are not. You know, do you guys typically have your budget set so you know in the back of your mind you kind of know what that is, or do you find that more often than not you actually have projects and you really don't know what the budget allocation needs to be for moving forward with an RFP?
In terms of planning, that's the case. Construction projects are easier because we work with engineers and designers, so we can get those estimates somewhat, and then we can assume a certain percentage of that for design. But yeah, that's helpful. Anybody else have anything to add to that?
I was gonna return to your original question. What other questions do we have when reading RFPs? And I think a big one is background information, availability of surveys or GIS data. That's it can be a lot of legwork on our end. And if there's that data available, you know, that can cut down our fee quite a bit.
Yeah, I was going to echo that, what Andrew was kind of saying too. I think from a construction kind of design development construction project, I would say planning obviously is more budget based, because I think that strongly ties to your level of public engagement is really kind of linked to that budget number. In terms of development of plans and construction documents, I think what Andrew's kind of getting at, that we'll read through a lot, is we want to develop plans to build this park, phase one of this project. And to us, a lot of things are, what about survey? What about geotech? What about, you know, I mean, are all these things going to be done, or do we need to bring in topo survey and a geotech and do all these extra detail-y pieces? And a lot of times those extra layers of base mapping, I guess, if you will, is maybe not clearly identified. And, you know, again, sometimes I can have up to 15-20% of the overall budget is just in that initial base mapping analysis that sometimes the county or the client will execute that directly prior to the project, and sometimes they're seeking us to facilitate that process.
Yeah, the only one I'd probably dovetail onto Bob's is construction services. Oftentimes we've seen a lot of proposals as needed, and I think we all know when projects go into construction, there should be some understanding about the anticipated level of effort, whether it's weekly or are there shared responsibilities between the client and the consultant team on construction services. That's one I do see a lot.
Sorry. Yep, we do have a question in the chat from Mary Jo. Do consultants usually have an area of expertise listed on their website?
I know that you guys can all do it all, but
I mean, I guess I can jump in first if you want. I haven't seen our physical website maybe in a few months now, but I would say our website is more generalized with project examples and things. So I don't think, at least WSB doesn't go into great extent on really focusing on a particular area of expertise. That probably comes back to what Andrew was saying, when you are asking for the, you know, the firm's background experiences, if that's something that if it is very important to you, or it's a very specific project that has unique kind of niche design elements that are incorporated, that by all means, I mean, ask for 3 or 5 relevant project experiences that are specific to building boardwalks or specific to, you know, a certain element or something that you want to make sure that the right consultant is there that has the knowledge and background to do that.
you know, the thing that I would love to see, because I'm not an engineer and our engineering department doesn't have a lot of time to help us out with writing some of these RFPs, is when you say design services, what pieces does that include? And can we check some boxes of, yes, we have this, no, we don't have this, yes, we have a survey, no, we don't have a blueprint, or, you know, things like that would be so helpful. What you guys have gone through today has been tremendously helpful. It's good to hear you guys working collaboratively as different groups coming up with the same messages to us. But it is nice to have some of those you know, kind of definitions for those people that are just starting out or don't have the expertise to lean on in writing that RFP.
There are a lot of RFP templates. I know I've seen some RFPs from different agencies that look pretty similar. So I think there's some that get passed around for various projects. But like was mentioned earlier, it's certainly okay to reach out to any of us and ask, do you have an example of an RFP for this type of project that you can send me, or can you help me write something? And that's not something we would charge you for unless it gets into a super extensive process. But I mean, we're certainly open to helping anyone with past examples of RFPs we've seen that we liked and our RFPs that we didn't like, and as well as project products, which might help you as well if you're not sure exactly what the product is that you're looking for in terms of a design.
That's great information to share an RFP. I think that would be awesome. So beware, now I have that tool.
Yeah, I just got a request last week for an RFP. So, I mean, it happens all the time. It's no problem.
Yeah, so it's fairly common, and as was talked about earlier too, even your peers. So I would say it's good and bad. And by that, I'm just saying, you know, you can ask, you know, your peers, and sometimes they'll say, we did this project 2 years ago, and yeah, this is something we overlooked. So it might not always be, you know, primroses and rainbows necessarily, but it's nice to even hear about what did we miss in our scope that came back as a big issue down the road. And you want to make sure, you know, obviously that's thought through as well. So, but yeah, like Gabrielle said, it's not uncommon, at least, you know, for us. Yeah, so we have a number of clients that will draft up an RFP before they send it out. They'll ask us to read through it and do a kind of a cursory review of what questions you have or what holes are in here, provide feedback. And that's something that, like I said, we're always willing to provide to clients.
Thank you. Does anyone else have a question? I know John had emailed me a couple weeks ago with the RFP topic and a question. I'm wondering if you got your questions today answered, if you had anything else that you wanted to throw out there.
No, most of the questions were answered. We're still in the infancy stages of what we're doing, so there'll be some reaching out that'll be done along the way for sure.
Okay.
And I think Ken brought it just, I guess if anything too, I mean, obviously we're all here as a resource, but at the very beginning, Ken said that as well, as making sure you're scoping it for what your project is. I think that makes a big difference as of how kind of things are today. And there's different scales of projects. You obviously don't. Well, you can do whatever you want. Preferably from our standpoint, we'd rather not write a 20-page letter proposal for a small, you know, $60,000 project. You know, things like that are, you know, better to just be a simple letter proposal. So even if you're unclear of what am I actually needing or what should I be asking for, I mean, they're going to reach out to any of us and ask the question, this is the project I have, what would you suggest? Is it qualification based, or is it just should I be doing a letter proposal, or should I be doing a full, you know, full formal proposal? So that's something else you can always ask as well. So,
And the other thing probably to add to that, one thing we didn't touch on was just from the time an advertisement is placed for soliciting a proposal. You know, I think all of us in the room could say, you know, 3 weeks would be the minimum amount of time we'd all like to have to respond to proposals. Sometimes if you get something that's due within 10 days, depending on what it is, sometimes can be challenging to respond to. So I think most agencies and clients do a good job with that. But once in a while you do see some come in, kind of turnaround time is being quick. And sometimes from the time we see a proposal being advertised, which we might not see several days after it's been posted, sometimes that can be a little challenging, but most agencies do a pretty good job with that.
That segues into my next question about what's a reasonable timeline. So I wanted to throw this up there, and I have in there something that consultants don't like to see is that there is no budget determined at this time. So sorry about that, but if we could just kind of go through this timeline, and I just kind of want to check and see if this is reasonable. So the solicit is the RFP is sent out on December 20th. Approximately 2 weeks later is the deadline for questions. Is that like obnoxiously long, or?
Well, I guess I'll chime in first, and then I'm sure everyone's going to add to this as well. So I do know, timing is important. I think technically speaking, yes. The one obviously red flag on this particular one is it lands like right over the holiday season, and a lot of staff do take time off. We're, at least in the private sector, a lot of us kind of hold our vacation and take it on holidays, when, at least for like myself, and my kids are out of school for like breaks and stuff. So when things like this come about, it is something to take into consideration when it is over like a 4th of July or a bigger holiday that does come to play. There are people that'll be out of the office, and things tend to stop a little bit on our end. But I think how you advertise it is important as well. And I can't remember if it was Andrew or Gabrielle that talked about it, but as you're writing a proposal, talking to other peers of yours and knowing, who do they like to work with, because a lot of times we're obviously we have our forums and our pop-ups that tell us when RFPs happen, but sometimes we may not actually see it posted for maybe 3 to 5 days, just because it takes a little while for us to catch it on the queues on our websites or our marketing team. So by all means, if you have clients or you have peers that have consultants that they love to work with, getting their contacts, and on December 20th, if that's the day it's really posted on your website, email it out to 5 or 8 or whatever, a handful of consultants that you've got good references from or you have good relationships with, because that gives us, like Ken said, that gives us an extra 3 or 5 days to really start thinking about it, that we may just lose just because it takes our marketing efforts a while to find it on your website at times. So
How about in terms of, I think the big question I had on this timeline is that once the questions are asked, we can turn around the answers pretty fast. And what we do is we send all the questions and answers to everyone that's interested in submitting a proposal. And then once the clarifications are sent, we had 1 week for the proposals to be submitted after clarifications are received. Is that reasonable? A 1 week time period?
I think so. From our standpoint, as soon as the RFP is released, it kind of starts this timer where we have to assemble our team. We have to reach out to sub-consultants, see if they're interested. Sometimes that takes a little bit of time to hear back from them. Some might go exclusive to another LA firm, so then we have to find someone else. So that's always a time constraint there. So that's kind of what we try to do right away in the beginning, and then starting an outline for the proposal, and we'll typically have that with the RFP, and then filling in the work plan, doing a site visit so you can write a nice project understanding, and then developing a fee. A lot of that content stuff happens in the last week. I would say you have the outline kind of towards the beginning, and then you're identifying staff in the office that are available. So there's a lot of moving pieces that happen in the background to get to that final proposal. So it seems like I love 3 weeks from the release of the RFP to when it's due in total.
yeah, I think the schedule you had, Gina, to me, aside from this, that it was falling over the holiday, I think the timing of that, the duration of things seemed really appropriate. The only thing that might be a little bit different is if it is more of a complex project that merits a site meeting, then, the site meeting really would be what I'd call the start of the project. So, there's a little bit of, like Andrew said, there's a little bit of maybe team building stuff that could be done kind of right out of the gate, but a lot of times we don't really start developing a lot of content or scope and until that site meeting is done, if indeed it has one, because everything kind of hinges on what we hear at that kind of site meeting or that pre-proposal meeting.
Yeah, the only thing maybe to take into consideration is day of the week that most consultants like to respond to RFPs, whether that's a Friday or a Monday. I'd be curious to know what the other consultants here think about an ideal day of the week to submit a proposal.
Friday.
Days are hard.
Friday.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mondays, you end up working over the weekend.
There you go. Good answer, Andrew. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say Thursday and Friday. Thursdays and Fridays are best. It seems Mondays and Tuesdays are always, you're trying to catch up from a weekend, or you have 25 emails that came in over the weekend and you're trying to put out fires in the early part of the week. So there is more ability to focus on kind of the quality of a proposal if it's the latter part of the week.
Good to know. Well, I would put out a last call for questions. Are there any other questions in the audience?
Oh, I
in the
just
group?
more of some maybe insight. Maybe can help me kind of understand, because it seems to never fail when you put one of these out that you get a bid that comes back triple another one. Maybe you can just provide some insight on what may drive scenarios like that. Is it a poorly written RFP, not a good understanding? Just somebody who doesn't have quite as much time as somebody else, or what drives that?
Yeah, I'd say it depends on what the project is, but if there's a budget listed, that would typically help get all the proposals to be similar price. But yeah, otherwise it's probably not a very specifically written RFP, you know, a wide range of, we want community engagement, but nothing about what type of community engagement, or how many meetings, or is it online, or who are we reaching out to? You know, no clear schedule or tasks or milestones or products listed. That might give you a wide range of fees.
It could be an inexperienced consultant that doesn't know, you know, maybe they haven't done this type of work previously. They don't know how much time goes into it. As we're building our fee, we're putting hours to tasks, and you know how it goes. You think you can get something done in 1 hour and it ends up taking you 3 hours. So a lot of times we're overestimating just because we know there'll be some unknown in there. And then the other thing could be, you might have a really compressed timeline. You know, you have speed, quality, and cost. You get to pick two, right, of those three. So if you wanted something really high quality and done really quickly, it's going to cost you more. So some things to think about there, but I suspect it's probably inexperienced consultant if they came in 3 times over.
I would say it kind of goes either direction. You got people that are 3 times over, or you have 3 proposals that are 60 to 70,000 and someone that's at like 39. And the council loves those, the ones at 39, but you know, obviously no different than getting 3 prices to, you know, put a furnace in your house. If a number is off from what you're hearing across the board, it should naturally be a red flag that something's missing. They've either overlooked something or something's omitted. So, you know, that's where that negotiation after the fact and really just confirming that everyone is kind of providing the same deliverable services at the end. Especially, like I said, I think Andrew said, the planning projects are the most complicated. I would say somewhere in the realm, a template has been released in the last 6 to 9 months, I would say, because I've seen a number of planning proposals as of lately that are, you know, we want a robust public engagement process. Define a public engagement process that meets this requirement. And then, you know, we're reading through it and we're like, well, they say robust, but what does that mean? And you know, you call and ask them and they're like, well, kind of build it, you know, and tell us what you think it's going to be. But, you know, again, that's where that could be one where you'll see the numbers vary quite a bit. If it's more boots on the ground, face-to-face events, you know, the cost will go up quite a bit. If it's more like some online surveys and some web-based actions, you know, that'll be a lot more economical, and you'll see a big variation in numbers in that regard, just not knowing what people are providing as that scope of service.
Okay, well, I see we're about less than a minute before 1 o'clock. So in the interest of keeping to our time, I'd like to say a great big thank you to the consultants. Thank you so much, Bob, Ken, Andrew, and Gabrielle, for taking the time to prepare and present to us on RFPs, and we'll be posting the recording on our website. And thanks to everybody who joined us. I hope that this was beneficial for you. And I hope you have a really wonderful day. So